And it's pretty much common knowledge by now that our brain can change, learn, evolve. It actually changes physically throughout our lives, and we can do some things to encourage this change in a positive direction. In episode 29 of Your Moving Mind, I'm talking with Christine Germain about neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and grow throughout life. Yes, it can. And this has become common knowledge in the last decades, but in real life, we tend to forget it. Or at least, we don't use the full potential of this marvelous fact. What makes the brain grow is learning. And in a modern society, we've left learning to the professionals. So many of us simply stop learning when we go out of school, and we can live a whole life just using and reusing the skills we had learned in our youth, which is a pity. So take to heart this reminder. You can learn, grow, and improve a little every day. Your brain actually craves the challenge. That's what it's made for. You're listening to Your Moving Mind, the meeting point of movement and mindfulness, and everything in between. Move your mind, mind your movement, with your host, Michael Landau. Hello and welcome to Your Moving Mind. I'm Michael Landau.
And I'm Christine Germain.
And today we're going to talk about neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is kind of a new term, relatively new in the science of the brain. And it's pretty much common knowledge by now that our brain can change, learn, evolve. It actually changes physically throughout our lives, and we can do some things to encourage this change in a positive direction.
And I think it's only been in the early 2000s that it's been proven, because before that, there were like Moshe Feldenkrais, the founder of the method we practice, is believed in this, but until the early 2000s, there was no imagery that could prove it. And people were like, neuroscientists still thought that after the age of 25, your brain had organized itself the way it was going to be. But now we know that we can learn, and there's plasticity, the capacity of the brain to change, ongoing until later in life. So it is quite phenomenal too. And I think that also changes the way we look at getting older. Like now that, would people stop themselves because they think, well, I'm like this now, and now it's like, no, it's not an excuse anymore. There's a capacity.
We're not like this. It was believed by neuroscientists for decades that the brain stops evolving at 20, 25, and you're stuck with what you've got. This is it. Deal with it. And this is simply not true. And yeah, now there are images to prove it. You can actually see changes in the brain. One famous proof of that is the brains of London taxi drivers. They have to pass a test in order to be a taxi driver in London. You have to pass a test and know the map of London and every street in most central London, like thousands of streets. You had to know them, you had to memorize them, and the hippocampus, this part that is in some way responsible for this feat of memorization, is larger in London taxi drivers. So you can see it. You can actually see the change.
Wow. Because I've lived in London, and we didn't have a map. Like I lived in London for 2 years, and we didn't have a map. We had the little book called A to Z, A to Z, and then the A to Z, like you would have one part of the city within that little book. Like it was small enough that you could carry it in your purse, but it would take, you had to learn how to use the book to find yourself in London. And there are so many small streets all over the place. It is, I'm not joking. Like it would, if I had an appointment with a friend, I would leave an hour and a half beforehand. I lived on the east side of London, so I wasn't downtown, of course, if you wanted to be able to afford anything in London. But that's pretty impressive that it shows it in the brain of the taxi driver.
Yeah, it's a fact. Yeah, that was probably before GPS, before you could let your phone navigate for you.
Yeah, interesting. The image I retain and I use a lot when I teach or talk about neuroplasticity, and I believe the first time I read it was in one of Norman Doidge book. I think it was the one on the brain that changes itself, but he talks about neuroplasticity, and one of the image is how when basically it's you have habits, we all have habits, we're creature of habits, and when you create a habits, it creates a neural pathways, a pathways in the brain, whereas it's going to be like a slope in the snow that where you slide over and over, then it's tapped and it's easy, and wherever you do, you just have a little tip and it's effortless and you go on that track. And when you try to form new habit, it's like walking in the snow. I'm from Canada, so I've walked in the snow that hasn't been tapped, and it's way more work. It's way more effort because it hasn't been tapped yet. Same with a new habit. It's not very easy. And then the more you take that new route, the more it gets tapped down, and then it gets easier to eventually you get more choices. And basically, the Feldenkrais method is a little bit what we do is we create more choices so that you have more of those route and tracks to choose from, where so you're not stuck into your autopilot. That would be my way of I use that a lot for explaining in a nice imagery the neuroplasticity of the brain.
Yeah, I heard a similar image for people who didn't grow up with a lot of snow like me. It's like the grooves that the tires leave in the sand. Like when you go in the sand, when you don't have a habitual way, you don't have a route to follow, you have many choices, but all of them are kind of difficult to go through the sand. Once you choose a route and repeat it, and you go through this, your car makes this trail in the sand. You can leave the wheel and it will stay in there because it is already grooved in. It's a similar image, right? And so it makes navigating much easier as long as you do the same, and it makes change a lot harder because it keeps you in. If you want to take your wheels out of these grooves, you'll have to do something, to make an effort. And my own image of what we do when we explore options and when we open up a little bit the habitual patterns is that you don't just go out of the groove and into the free desert. You just make it a little wider. So you peel off bits of the walls of your grooves so that you have more choice. You have you still need your habits. You don't want to destroy them and just invent everything every day from scratch. You want to be able to repeat things that are repeated without too much mental investment, but you can create more options, more free space, more possibilities. And when you have more options, you make better choices. So you can play with your habit. It's not one way, and it's not as automatic.
And you adapt, yeah, and you adapt those choices according to what is needed in that particular situation.
Yeah.
So that and that's the same with behavior or anything like that. So definitely, if I can mention one really, like, we're talking about neuroplasticity, but a really good way to a good book on habit is Atomic Habits, is a really good book on really do little changes. And another way of, we teach movement, but the movement is the pathway for changing the brain that way. So when you come to an awareness through movement class, it's not, or you take a lesson online, the movement is not that important. It's your attention to the movement to create that neuroplasticity. And I think that's a differentiation to make, because sometimes people come and they want to do the movement right, and that's not what we're doing. The movement we want versatility and choices, not only in the movement, but that affects also behavior and the choices in how we look at life, and or at our choices in life. And I think one indirect way that really resonates with me is the book, also the Drawing with the Right Side of the Brain, where they make you look at the drawing that you'll draw. They show you a picture upside down, and then you have to draw it that way, so that you don't come with your preconceived idea of what the lamp looks like, or what this, you don't even recognize the drawing. And I remember doing this exercise, and I don't consider myself a very good drawer, and I really wanted to improve that skill. And I remember doing the exercise in the book where it's a person basically, and I was just following the line without the preconceived idea of what it was, because I didn't know what it was. And then I turn around my drawing, and suddenly it's a man sitting on a chair with a lamp next to it, and I couldn't even understand how I did that. So
That's a good one.
yeah, and I think
I
that's
don't know this book.
yeah, it's a beautiful book. Yeah, it's translated in a few languages, Drawing with the Right Side of the Brain. So you don't have the, the left side Cartesian, like really like judging or what is analyzing. It's more like what is. And I think in general that we can gain so much from looking at things from different perspective. And I love that those lessons that are from the Feldenkrais method that do change that perspective. For example, like, you could say that you have a shoulder that is higher than the other, more forward, but that's only forward in relationship to other parts of yourself. And if you just go into a correction mode, then you're not changing the brain. You're just moving that back, and you're not taking into account the rest of yourself. When you think about the whole picture of like, okay, if the shoulder is forward, the two other, like the other points, the hip points and the other shoulder points are back. So by changing that perspective, and then you bring them on a similar plane, it comes from a deeper perspective, and that creates a different vision of how you use yourself. And I think that can have a deeper, that does have a deeper impact on how you create the image of yourself, and bring a change in how you map yourself, that map that you have of yourself in the brain, which is relationship to not how big a body part is, or it has to do with how much you sense from that body parts, or how much you use it. So if you use less of yourself, for example, if you have an injury, that body map, that map in your brain that you have of that area diminishes. So it's so important that if you do have an injury or had a trauma, or that you still continue to touch or pay attention to it or include it in your thinking when you move so that you don't lose that part. Because yes, neuroplasticity is basically real estate in your brain, that those movements occur, and then there's competition. So if that area that you're not using is not being used or not thought of, I should say thought of more than used, because the thinking has quite a big impact, then the other area will take that place in the brain, and it will be more difficult to bring that part of you back into action. So I think that's a big part of including into whether it's healing, or maybe it's just because of a habit of a certain type of work or sport you play that makes a certain part of you not so part of your ecology or thinking. Then when you bring those back, the whole system improves and you get deep transformation, not just physically, but with that neuroplasticity of the brain.
Yeah. When you look at it from the point of view of neuroplasticity, what we do in our work is a process of learning. And learning changes your brain. This is like, makes sense. You do learning with your brain, and it is capable of changing. And yeah, there are, again, some things that you can see in images. For example, the hand presentation of a pianist has a much larger presentation of the ring finger than of the normal population, because you use it separately, and you have to be able to control it very precisely. You can see that the brain maps adapt themselves to the use that you give your body. So this is part of learning that happens as you develop skills. It does change physically the shape of the brain, and when and over time it creates these highways that are habitual things, the things we do again and again, that become more difficult to change. So as we age, this is why it's maybe more difficult, or it takes more time to learn to change things as you grow old. Not because your brain becomes calcified and doesn't change anymore. It's because you have very ingrained habits. So you have to bring them to your consciousness. First, you need to know what you're doing in order to change anything. So we use awareness. We just call our attention to details of what we do, and we play with them so that we open up a little bit that deep groove of habit. And this way, it is difficult because you have the habit and it is well ingrained, and you've been doing it the same way for years. I have one story that I want to tell you. It is very silly. It was an experiment that I did because I wanted to prove to myself that I can change a habit, like get out of this groove. So I decided to take a look at how I put on my clothes on my legs. So I get up, I take off my pajama, I put on underwear, I put on pants, I put on socks. I looked which foot I put in first. And so with all of these parts of clothing, you do it about 8 times in the morning. Then again in the evening, you take the things off. I assure you, you can try it. You do it always with the same foot first. It is not random. You have a pattern there. It's a habit. I never thought about it before. You probably didn't either, and it's not really important that you do. I don't recommend it particularly. It was an experiment for me, and I decided to take a look. So the difficult thing in changing a habit is remembering to pay attention, because it's automated. It's no problem to put the other foot first. It's very easy to change, but you have to think about it again and again. And I did, took the challenge, did it every morning, So because I have this training in awareness through the Feldenkrais method, I could remind myself and actually remember to do it again and again. And by now, this was months ago, I actually, on most mornings and evenings, I know which foot I put first. And I play with it. I do it once with the left, once with the right. Not really important. Yeah, it's not a habit that that is essential to change, but I proved it to myself that I can take a very well ingrained habit. I learned to do these things in the first 2 years of my life, right? And I probably did it the same way for the last 60 some years. It can be changed if you pay attention to it. Simple. And now it is less automatic than it was. I know what I'm doing. It is not a particularly important habit, but this is how we do it, right? This is how we work. Just you pay attention, you can change.
And that, I think, that's a great example, Michael, and I think it's something that has deeper impact than just the foot and the leg in the leg, of course. I often point that out to my students. I check that myself, or how you go up a stairs. Do you always, most of us will use the same foot to go on the first step. Putting the jacket on and off, it's often the same arm. So I do play with that in how that affected even how I learned sport. At some point I took a surfing class when I was in California, and he's asking, well, which side are you? And I know that, you know, if I'm going to kick a ball, I know I'm going to kick with my right foot, and my left leg's going to be my standing leg. If I go and do other sport, I know which side I am. Getting out on a surfboard, I wasn't sure. And at the same time, I was like, why should I, you know, just do it on one side? But you have to know, because you need to know where you're going to put the ankle, where you attach yourself to the board. So he's like, just get on, you know, you lay down on the board. We're on the beach. We're not in the water yet. And then he's like, you pop yourself up, and then you go and you decide which foot's going to be in front. And there was something that was just natural on one side, but I was like, I want to see how different, like, you become curious. When you start playing with that neuroplasticity, you become curious about, well, is that difference? Where in my body do I know this is a preference? And then I went to the other side, and the surf teacher was looking at me, is like, this is not the side you took the first time. And it's like, nobody does that. He's like, why? Well, you'll know when you're in the water, but I don't think this. I'm like, no, I know the other side was my favorite side. I just wanted to see how it feels to the other side. And he was completely confused, because I was just curious and interested to see, well, can I pop myself up on the other side? And so I think it's a nice experiment that we could leave the audience with today, and playing, like, go and explore what are these very simple habits, and you're gonna catch yourself trying something new, and that affects the whole musculature, because when you're doing on one side, you're only ready on that other side, and you're actually learning through movement new habits that will affect how the brain rewire itself. And if I can leave also with some reading on the topic, the books from Norman Doidge, there's The Brain That Changes Itself, that will show you also the research behind how did they figure out what is that map we're talking about, where, like, the studies, the research they did that prove that, and the Norman Doidge also wrote The Brain's Way of Healing. So he has two really good books. He's a psychiatrist and neuroscientist, and I think he makes it very available to the general public to read on the topic.
Yeah, and he has two chapters on Feldenkrais in his last book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So, and also the other recommendation, well, I'll put it in the episode notes, Atomic Habits by James Clear. It really changed my relationship with habits and was also an inspiration for persistent growth, my daily mindful movement practice. I was reading it at the time when I was starting to develop it. So yeah, and I have just one more idea that when you look into a habit, something like this, which arm goes first, which leg goes first, which foot you put first on the step, which foot you start walking with. Besides the change in the actual movement and the actual habit, which may be more important or less important, it is also a practice of mindfulness. So you get it. It is a skill that you can improve by paying attention. And yeah, I think I could do it without very much struggle, without forgetting too many times, because I have the practice, I have the skill. I remember to take a look. So I'm probably have this skill is useful to be less on automatic pilot, more knowing what I'm doing, give me more opportunity to actually make a choice and decide. I want to do it, do I?
And a reminder that if you do catch yourself and it's already too late or you forgot, don't beat yourself up. Be playful with it. It's just, you know, it's a curiosity of your own, you know, and your own research, your own exploration. So I think it's worth just exploring with a little bit of lightness, not beating yourself up because you did that same habit again. You're human, and it's a practice that will expand over time.
Yeah, and the nice thing about this kind of exploration is that it doesn't really have a goal. I mean, I didn't mean to change the first foot that I'm putting into my pants and from now on put the other one. It's not about that at all. And there is no right answer, right? It doesn't matter which foot I put first. It's about creating choice. So it's a game, it's a challenge, play with it. It's not about doing it right.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is it for today about neuroplasticity. Remember, change is possible.